I figure that for most of us, we have a game that just feels like the console it was released on. Like you can't think of one without thinking of the other. For some examples, when I think of the Super Nintendo, the game that pops into my mind as the game that just feels the most Super Nintendo is Super Mario World. When I think of the Nintendo 64, the game that pops into my mind is Banjo-Kazooie. For the GameCube, it's Luigi's Mansion. PS2 is Sly 2. The game doesn't have to be your favorite on the system. It most likely is just the first game you've played on it, or perhaps the aesthetic of it just screams that console. I imagine for a lot of people, the games they'd think of for the original Xbox would be something like Fable, Knights of the Old Republic, maybe even Blinx, or what's probably the most common pick, Halo. And while Halo is a pretty strong contender for me, the game that I think of is a bit more out there and obscure. Star Wars Obi-Wan. Now I think of this game for a few reasons. One of which is that I think it was the first Xbox game I've played, or at least one of the first. And this game has never been re-released, so it only is on this console. But I think the biggest reason is the box art. Look at this and tell me this does not scream original Xbox. This looks just like the Xbox's menu, which is still my favorite aesthetic for a console menu, and that's Startup. This box art is weird though. Like, why is it green? This is a game about Obi-Wan, you know, the guy with the blue lightsaber? The aesthetic isn't represented in game at all. None of the menus or HUD or anything in the game looks like this. It's just the box art. It's weird. I think the only reason for this is that it's an Xbox game. But then I think I remember hearing that it was going to have a GameCube port that was cancelled, so I don't know. But anyways, this is a rather obscure but infamous game. It didn't have a very good reception at the time, and the few people who remember it tend to be rather harsh towards it. I've heard people say this is one of the worst Star Wars games, if not the worst, but I've never really got that. I mean, I guess I could understand not really liking it, but I've always loved this game. But I suppose I should tell you why, so let's begin.
In the red corner!
Now, I'm not going to be talking that much about the story for this one, simply because this is a game based on the Phantom Menace. And I don't feel like reviewing Phantom Menace right now, to be honest. So I'll mainly focus on how it differs from the movie. It actually starts before the events of the movie. Obi-Wan is sent on a mission to the lower levels of Coruscant to investigate some suspicious activity. All that happens is he mercilessly cuts down a bunch of criminals. Now that I think about it, there isn't much of a point to this level. Its only purpose is to establish the Black Heth, which we don't get much info on. We don't know who their leader is or what they want. I guess they're just a group of thugs or something. We don't even know what they're called until the second level, in which they've taken hostage an informant the Coruscant Guard had placed inside their operation. Once you save the guy, he tells you the Black Heth is receiving a large shipment of arms and plan on turning Coruscant into a war zone. What, like the whole planet? This doesn't seem like a big enough gang to go to war with an entire planet, especially since they're about to be ejected from the plot. The last you see of the Black Heth is when you find out who they're getting their weapons from, the Jin Ha, who then become your main target. You know, I don't know what kind of war the Black Heth were planning, but the Jin Ha primarily use melee weapons. Sure, Jedi can reflect blaster bolts, but you wouldn't just be fighting Jedi, and they wouldn't help much anyways. But so, Obi-Wan defeats them and plants a tracking device on their ship. You learn these guys make their weapons and armor out of cortosis, which is a material that can resist lightsabers. Jedi Masters Plo Koon and Eth Koth are sent to investigate the Jin Ha on Obra-Dan, but they went missing. So Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are sent to find them. After finding their ship that was shot down, they split up. Qui-Gon goes to find the other Jedi, while Obi-Wan single-handedly infiltrates their cortosis mine and basically destroys their operation in wiping out the entire Jin Ha. At least I think they're gone since we never see them again. You know, Qui-Gon, you'd think you would be the one to do this instead of your Padawan, but whatever. After all of them are done massacring the Jin Ha, they notice a Trade Federation ship fly by, and it's at this point the story transitions into the Phantom Menace's story. The story follows the movie fairly closely at this point, parts extended for gameplay reasons of course, but not a whole lot notable. The Jin Ha are connected to the Trade Federation, but only for this one enemy type that uses their weapons. That's the only purpose of their inclusion to the story. I like these guys and all, but it's a weird thing to try and tie into the story of the Phantom Menace, then do so little with it. The most notable changes are the things they exclude. Jar Jar is not in this game at all. None of the Gungans are. They completely skip over them. There isn't even a mention. That whole battle scene with them and the droids just is not mentioned. The only hint of them is that water vehicle shows up in one level. That's it. Also, Anakin isn't in this game. Well, aside from, like, the ending cutscene, but other than that, you don't see him at all. When you get to Tatooine, you don't go to Mos Eisley. There's no pod race either. I guess if you wanted it to be more accurate to the movie, you could just play around in that pod racing game on N64 when you get here. But instead, Tusken Raiders kidnap the Queen and you have to go save her while Qui-Gon is gambling in town. Hell, not even Yoda talks, which is weird. You see him, but Mace does most of the talking in these scenes. But like, that's all the noteworthy differences. Most of the stuff from the movie isn't really here. So this isn't a very ideal way of experiencing the Phantom Menace's story. Or, well, I guess it could be depending on how you feel about the movie. But the point is, it's a movie tie-in game that really didn't care much about the story, but added some interesting stuff before the starting events. It's a bit weird how this game exclusively focuses on Obi-Wan's perspective, when it could be argued Qui-Gon was the actual protagonist of the movie, and that would fit the whole green aesthetic of the box art much better. But I guess more people care about Obi-Wan, so if you had to choose one, then I suppose it makes sense. But like, why not let you play as both? This isn't the only Phantom Menace game, and that other one lets you play as Qui-Gon, so why is this only focused on Obi-Wan? One thing I found a bit odd is the loading screens have Obi-Wan not just from Episode 1, but 2 and 4 as well. Considering this game is just called Star Wars Obi-Wan and not, the Phantom Menace, I have to wonder if the idea of this game was just to follow Obi-Wan throughout all the movies, but ended up only covering the Phantom Menace. This is purely speculation, but it would make a lot of sense to me if it was the case. But yeah, there's not much else to really say here, except for the voice acting, which is special. Now, I don't think the voice acting is that bad, but they didn't get any of the original actors.
We've identified the group that attacked you as the Black Heth. According to the authorities, they are a group of wanted criminals who up to this point have been involved in petty crime.
That is not Samuel L. Jackson.
We must be in the battle droid factory. It looks like it's in full production. The Trade Federation must be up to something.
And that is not Liam Neeson. But I don't think they did a bad job. It's interesting hearing the differences in how the actors perform lines from the movie. Like in the movie, Qui-Gon is pretty calm when the room they're in fills with poison gas.
Dioxys.
But here he's like,
Dioxys gas! Poison!
Also, the follow-up to this is slightly different from the movie, where the Viceroy says,
They must be dead by now. Destroy what's left of them.
But here the droid says,
They must be dead by now, but make certain. Check it out, Corporal. Roger, roger.
Which I think makes a slight bit more sense. Why would you need to destroy what's left? This is your ship. I don't think you'd have much trouble disposing of the bodies. Anyways, this line is also funny.
They've destroyed our ship!
Okay, I said the voice acting wasn't bad, but there's one big exception. Obi-Wan himself.
It's not about the mission, Master. It's something elsewhere. Elusive.
Good lord, for the most important character, he has the worst voice acting.
I'm actually just a Padawan.
A what?
Never mind. My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It's so bad it's funny.
Everything has been quiet, Master. Nothing unusual to report. Are you sure my presence here is necessary?
So many lines that wouldn't be anything special are iconic with this performance. If you push the interact button when there's nothing to interact with, Obi-Wan will be like,
I'm not sure.
but if you push it next to an NPC, he'll be like,
Hello?
who says hello like that? Seriously.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Great
Hello?
warrior.
Hello?
Oh, but it gets better. If you keep talking to an NPC, he'll eventually go,
What's your story?
and then the most iconic line from this game.
Do you understand my language?
That delivery. Oh man. If this game was more known, this line would get memed so much. Also, Obi-Wan's reaction to Qui-Gon dying is not nearly as dramatic.
Master! No!
Man, this game is so quotable. And Obi-Wan isn't the only one with iconic lines. Another one of my favorites is from Mace Windu when he says,
I shred your name and scatter you to the winds of Alderaan!
having all the Jedi in one room, you get so many quotable lines. Also, sometimes NPCs have unique dialogue for specific scenarios, but then their voice will completely change to the generic NPC voice.
Hello?
You need more grenades? Here you go.
Hello? Hello?
Great warrior!
Hello? 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 Hello?
Are you
Hello?
lost, Jedi?
Hello?
You need more grenades? Here you go.
Also, Darth Maul has voice lines, but you can't really hear them in-game because he's so quiet and Duel of the Fates is blaring.
I hope you are more challenging than your master. I'm somewhat disappointed in him. Your skill with the saber is equaled only by your skill at dying.
I noticed some weird unused voice lines for some characters, and I have no idea what they might have been intended for.
Another pressing matter on our docket is the disappearance of the 2 Jedi from Corellia, Yohimbo and his student Sanjura. Master Saisi, I believe you have information on this? Follow me if you value your life. I am in need of a weapon.
Even Maul has a couple lines like this.
Follow me, now! Wait here. I'll handle this. Give me a weapon, and don't make me ask you again.
I do wonder what the development behind this game was like. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find much of anything. Okay, that's about all that can be said regarding the story. Let's move on. So now talking about presentation. Visually, well, it's not the best looking game. Okay, I don't think it looks awful. The environments are decent and look like what they're supposed to look like. This looks like the Trade Federation command ship. This looks like Theed. This looks like the room where Obi-Wan fights Maul. But the environments don't really do much of anything outside the bare minimum. Things look like what they're supposed to, and that's about it. Sometimes there's some neat environmental details like these Tuscan wall paintings, and the lower levels of Coruscant have a cool aesthetic. But it's pretty basic. The swamp looks like a swamp. What more can be said about it? Waterfalls do look pretty bad, though. Also, it suffers from too many hallways. Like the Cortosis mine is 90% hallways. There's nothing in this place other than hallways and elevator rooms. There's this big room with some red liquid below, but what's its purpose? There's some reusal of assets here and there. They use the same destroyed ship model for when Plo Koon and Eth Koth are shot down by the Jin Ha, and when your ship is destroyed by the Trade Federation. Nothing about this game is visually impressive. At most, you could say there's a nice glow effect on the lightsabers, and you'd leave scorch marks on surfaces you strike, which is cool. But that's all. You certainly can't say the character models look good. Their mouths don't even move when they talk. Let me remind you, this is an original Xbox game. Not even just a 6th gen game, an Xbox game. The Xbox was a powerhouse. You can only imagine what this would have looked like if it was on PS2. The models are low poly and not very good looking. The animations are simplistic and using game animations during cutscenes, so it looks stiff, and there's no choreography. How is it that Perfect Dark on N64 is much better looking, much better animated, and much better choreographed than an Xbox game? And that's all that needs to be said. Okay, time to talk about music. Well, it's a Star Wars game, so it has Star Wars music, so it's really good, but I can't really play any of it for obvious reasons. I hope you've been enjoying the Jet Force Gemini music I've been playing. Okay, so it is based on The Phantom Menace, so of course it's going to use that movie's music, which isn't a problem at all, and it makes sense. But it's always been a pet peeve of mine when games based on any license just use the score from that property. It just kind of feels a little lazy to me. I don't know, the score was made for a movie. I mean, it's not like it doesn't work in a game, but it wasn't made with a game in mind. Music can greatly enhance a game, but when I'm playing a Star Wars game and I just hear normal Star Wars music, it doesn't do much for me, you know? The music wasn't crafted around the game, it's just used in places where it would play in the movie. Or if it's not something from the movie, they would just try to pick what would best fit the situation. And I guess it works, but it doesn't feel all that special. I'm not saying don't use the movie score at all. Like, you couldn't do the fight with Maul without Duel of the Fates. But I wish there was original music in addition to the movie score. Or how about remixes? That's something you don't get very often in stuff like this. At the very least, Star Wars is better than other properties where some games do get original music like Republic Commando and Bounty Hunter. Though it's not perfect as even Jedi Outcast, which is an original story, just uses the movie soundtracks. But whatever. My point is, it's boring when it's only the movie score. That's all. So, on to gameplay. Right away, you have an option to play a training mode. Thankfully, it's skippable, though I'd say it's probably essential to play it if it's your first time playing, because this game plays differently. It's a simple and straightforward tutorial where they just go over each ability one after another, and at the end you have to fight a training droid to show that you know how it works. You can mess with the Jedi watching you through the glass, which I always found amusing as a kid. So first off, you have tank controls, and while they're not the worst feeling tank controls out there, it is a bit sluggish and hard to be precise with. So sometimes you look drunk trying to move around. The game never really demands precise movement, so you're never forced to do something the controls aren't equipped for. Plus, there is a button for doing a 180 to turn around. While it may not feel the most pleasant to control at times, it's not a big issue. Jumping to other platforms or ledges might be a little imprecise, but again, the game doesn't demand that much. And you could grab ledges, so there is leniency. You can crouch and roll, which is used to go through tight spaces, and if you're on fire, rolling puts it out. You can also somersault and cartwheel. There doesn't seem to be much of a practical reason for this. I guess cartwheeling to the side can be used to dodge attacks, but the somersault doesn't really go faster than your normal running speed, though it is fun to do anyways. That is your basic moveset, though not the end of it. But before that, there's no direct camera control. The right stick does not move the camera, and it's not like some other games of the time where the triggers move the camera. It's always behind you. The only control you have over it, besides it pointing where you're looking, is a button that allows you to look around. The reason for this is that the right analog stick is used to swing your lightsaber. Tilting the stick to the right will swing the lightsaber to the right, and tilting it to the left will swing it to the left. Tilting the stick up will do an overhead strike downwards. If you tap the same direction multiple times, you'll do follow-up attacks. My favorite is the overhead one. This method of attacking may take some getting used to, especially with how sluggish movement can be, but it's worth it. Once you get the hang of things, it's incredibly satisfying to use the analog stick to control the lightsaber. Now sure, it is a bit simplistic, you get 3 directions to swing, but there's something that just feels nice about using the stick for this. Feels a lot better than the Wii version of Force Unleashed, I'll tell you that. When you tilt the stick, you swing the lightsaber. None of the unresponsive motion controls that bogged that game down. Now, considering that you can only swing in 3 directions, one might ask why not just use buttons? Unlike a game like Grabbed by the Ghoulies, where using the stick to attack allows you to attack in any direction, including behind you, you don't cover as many directions. And sure, this game doesn't take super advantage of it. Enemies won't be blocking in one direction, allowing you to swing in the opposite direction to hit them or anything. But as I said, it's about how it feels. Doing these same attacks with buttons wouldn't really feel as satisfying. Not to say using buttons for lightsaber combat isn't satisfying. I mean, Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy easily have the best lightsaber combat in the series, though for different reasons. But Obi-Wan I'd say is in second place. It's not for everyone, and it takes getting used to. Newcomers might not really get a handle of the combat and just spam attacks, which is probably a factor in this game getting poor reviews. But once you get it, it's just really fun. Also, you can lock on enemies, and that may be useful if you're having a hard time getting a handle of the controls. But I never use it. I don't think it's necessary, and frankly, I find it more satisfying when not using it. Now, I said you can only swing in 3 directions, so you might be wondering what happens when you tilt the stick down. That is for countering. Now, Obi-Wan will naturally block attacks from the front if your lightsaber is out, but if you tilt down, you'll get these sparks on your blade. This depletes a bit of your force, but I'll get to force abilities in a bit. If an enemy shoots you with a blaster, tilting down is how you reflect their shot back at them, though this doesn't work against snipers. And if an enemy with a melee weapon attacks you while you tilt down, you'll stun them, leaving them open for attack for a moment. It's simple to pull off, but I think some people might not have realized this works on melee attacks as well. This is also really satisfying to do, and is the best way of dealing with tougher enemies. Now, by holding down the left trigger, you can use the Force. It will basically enhance your normal moveset, and add a few new moves. You have a force meter that naturally replenishes itself, and each force ability will deplete a different amount of it. While holding the trigger, you can do a force jump, which is much higher than your normal jump. This is obviously useful for navigation, but also dodging attacks and getting out of a crowd. You have 2 different versions of force push. One that pushes enemies, pretty standard. With this you can stun them by having them fall on the ground, hurt them by setting them into a wall, or just throw them off a ledge. The other force push affects objects in the environment. It works the same, but if enemies are nearby, they'll home into the enemy, which can be rather fun, especially when pushing something that explodes. You also have Force Pull, which is used to disarm enemies. It only works on blasters, though, not melee weapons, though it would be a bit too powerful if it could do that. It's pretty fun when an enemy points a gun at you and you just go yoink! Though doing this means you can't reflect their shots, so you lose that advantage. Though you can't reflect snipers or grenade launchers, so it's good to use on them. You can slow down time, which is an ability I didn't even know was in the game for years, and even after I found out, I kept forgetting about it. It also slows you down as well, so I don't find it very useful. But since I never really use it, if it is useful, I wouldn't really know. When using the Force, your saber strikes are also enhanced. You can't do follow-up strikes, but the one strike you have deals double damage. The animations also change, and the killing blow will send enemies flying. Really sells the power of these strikes. Also, if your force is full and you hold the force button long enough, the aura below you will change. When it's like this, and you push up on the right stick, you'll pull the enemy in for a stab that instantly kills them. There's a different animation for droids. This doesn't work on bosses, except this guy who can survive it. But then there's this Jinha guy who just dies instantly. Though doing this move will drain all of your force. And the last force ability you have is Saber Throw. When using the force and clicking the right stick, Obi-Wan commands his enemies to
Decide yourself!
as he tosses his lightsaber. You have control over the saber with the right stick, though it will keep going forward until you run out of force, or let go of the trigger. It also eats up your force like nothing else, so if you miss you'll have to wait to use it again. This is easily the most fun saber throw in any Star Wars game. It's pretty ridiculous. Wiping out an entire group of enemies with one throw will never not be satisfying, though it's not quite as effective on stronger enemies as it doesn't do any more damage than your normal strikes, and it can only hit a single enemy once per throw. But it can be a good defensive option when you're low on health to keep running and throw your lightsaber when your force is back up. Also, if you're right up against force fields or doors, you can actually throw your lightsaber through them, which you can do to hit enemies before they can even do anything, which while kinda broken is still fun. All this combined and you feel pretty powerful. Perhaps not nearly on the same level as Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, those are basically Jedi simulators, but this still makes you feel like a Jedi in its own way. You have other equipment as well. The D-pad is used to cycle through your inventory, and you use up to select it and down to deselect it. When the lightsaber is highlighted, you can turn it on and off. When the saber is off, tilting the right stick will turn it on and perform the swing at the same time, so you don't need to use the D-pad to turn it on. But I like that you can turn the lightsaber on and off at will. It's a pet peeve of mine when a game doesn't let you do that. There's just something so satisfying when jumping into a crowd of enemies while igniting your saber, and when the job is done, turning it off. It's just kinda lame when you can't control that. Your character turns it on automatically when approaching enemies and never turning it off. Force Unleashed! Anyways, besides the lightsaber, you have binoculars by default, which you could use to look around. Not much of a point to use them, but it's nice anyways. You can actually pick up other weapons and use them weirdly, like grenades and a sniper rifle. Yeah, you can use a gun in this game, and it is pretty helpful, though you can only use it while scoped and you can't move with it. Also to shoot it, you click the right stick, which is a little awkward. The grenades come in a few varieties. Normal explosions, stun grenades that disable droids, and incendiary grenades. I don't use grenades much at all because they're cumbersome to use. You equip them, and like the sniper rifle, you have to click the stick to throw them. But also, the longer you hold it, the farther you throw it, and it's really awkward trying to throw it where you want it to go. You can't really aim it easily. You only need to use grenades once in the entire game, so they're safely ignorable, thankfully. There are a few power-ups you can find, health packs as you'd expect. These are the only things reflective of the green aesthetic on the cover. I always thought it was funny when you have full health and you can't pick them up, you can go in the center of them, and it looks like he's doing double hula hoops. There's also these bigger health packs that give full health. Other than that, you have these power-ups that make you invincible for a short time, pretty basic, and these that give you unlimited force for a short time, which can be fun. Those power-ups don't show up too often though, especially invincibility. There's a decent amount of enemies you'll fight, and the enemies you fight change as you go through the game. First are the Black Hath, and they are pretty simple, and very easy to take out. All but one of these guys go down in a single hit. These hooded guys can have a blaster, but mostly just have a knife. These guys can also have blasters, but more often have pipes, which I thought were golf clubs as a kid. If they're disarmed, they just punch you. Then there's these enemies who almost always just carry a bat. They're no different from the pipe-wielding guys. Rarely these guys will have grenades. These guys with pipes and bats can block your lightsaber, but if hit enough times they will break, which leaves them with no defense, and they'll have to resort to their fists. You can instantly break their weapon with a force strike, which also leaves them cowering for a moment. The Rodians are funny. They always have a blaster, but they're cowards. If there aren't any other enemies around, they will run away. Even if there are enemies around, if you take their blaster, they'll run anyway. And the last enemy type are the Trandoshans. They take 2 hits to kill. Other than that, they just have grenade launchers or spiked bats. Nothing special. You only fight the Black Hath for 3 levels, and only at the beginning of the 3rd level before it shifts to the Jinha. And this is where the game's difficulty progression gets weird, because the Jinha are the toughest enemies in the game. The Jinha are differentiated through the weapons they have since they all look the same. The lowest ones wield knives, but they can have any kind of blaster, the normal ones, snipers, and grenade launchers. All of them take 2 hits to kill, as well as the lowest tier of melee users. There are also ones with maces, which are basically the same, but take 4 hits to bring down, and then the ones with swords that take 6 hits. All these guys have weapons that can't break, though you can stun them by hitting them enough or with a counter. These guys are similar to the melee Black Heth enemies, but are more mobile, being able to move similarly to you with cartwheels. Individually, these guys aren't too tough, but they can swarm you, and if you don't know what you're doing, they can really do some damage. I imagine quite a few people may have struggled with these guys because they weren't used to the controls or didn't quite get how to best play this game, and that may have negatively affected their feelings on the game. And I'll admit, this is a bit of a difficulty spike. There probably should have been a bit more of the Black Heth, who I do think are good introductory enemies, before they throw these guys at you. I would say they should be easier, but then I wouldn't want to lose out on what they provide, because I find them the most fun to fight because they offer a little more challenge. Now, if you're like me and know how this game works and are good at it, these guys aren't that hard at all. It's more of a beginner's trap. I guess what I'd want is for them to be endgame enemies, which would be difficult to do when you have to follow the movie, which didn't have these guys. After the Jinha, the events of the movie start, which means for the vast majority of the rest of the game you're fighting battle droids. The battle droids are my least favorite enemies. Not that they aren't fun to fight at all, but they're just not as interesting. Most battle droids are just the standard droids with blasters, so like the other blaster-wielding enemies, but not as nimble as the Jinha, and they go down in one hit. Even the red ones, which are supposed to be tougher, die in one hit. It's just that if you reflect their shots, it takes 2 hits. And these guys get destroyed instantly when pushed against a wall. Even the Black Heth took 2 hits from that. The strength of the battle droids is numbers. You'll fight more droids at once than any other enemy, and since they all have blasters, they can chip away at your health if you're not careful. But at that point, you just stand in place and reflect their shots. And it isn't even hard to just rush in and start slicing, or just obliterate them with a good saber throw. The issue with the droids is that they're really easy, especially after the Jinha. They're only a little tougher than the Black Heth because of all the blasters. The droids can also have sniper rifles, which just make them weaker Jinha snipers. They rarely can have grenades as well. Then there are the ones with these blowtorches, which, while they go down easily, their melee range is long enough to where it can be tricky hitting them before they hit you. But those are the main droids. There are other special droid enemies, like these walking heads that explode. A simple push just gets rid of them, so they're not the most interesting. You have these 4-legged droids that show up occasionally and shoot explosive shots, but if you get up close, they can't attack you. These guys are even rarer and basically act the exact same as the 4-legged ones. Another droid type is the assassin droid. These guys are just Jinha, like they're just the same. They use the same weapons, but are a little tougher, they take more hits to kill. However, they are less agile than the Jinha, and they appear in lower numbers. The max you ever really fight at once is 3, where the Jinha could swarm you, so they still end up being easier than the Jinha. And the last droid type is the Droideka. They can be a bit of a pain because they shoot fast and you can't really reflect their shots. The game wants you to use grenades to disable their shields, allowing you to easily take them out, but you can just go up to them and slash them a bunch until they die. Their shield doesn't stop your lightsaber. I remember avoiding playing levels with these guys in them as a kid because I didn't like using grenades. But once I found out you didn't need them, they became trivial. See what I mean about how weird the difficulty progression is? These guys are just easier than the Jinha. They do have a different kind of challenge with most of them having blasters, but that just isn't that much harder than the Black Heth. They're not even as fun to fight as the Black Heth, and you fight them for most of the game, which is a tad annoying. They're not unfun to fight, but they could be better. And this isn't the end of the weird difficulty progression, because in the middle of all the droid levels, you get a level in a boss fight with Tusken Raiders. These guys are slightly tougher Black Heth. They take 2 hits to kill, and only 2 hits. You won't find any that take more, and their weapons break, so they're not as tough as the Jinha. They're like an in-between of the Black Heth and the Jinha. It's weird. If they were placed in between them, the difficulty progression would make a lot more sense. The only other thing they have going for them is some of them light their weapons on fire, which can set you on fire, but it's easily put out. They can also have blasters and snipers, but the only ones you'll need to worry about are the ones with incendiary grenades. If you're not careful around them, they can deal a lot of damage. These guys are fun to fight, but still fairly easy. The enemies are all fun and satisfying to fight, and the combat in general, while a bit rough to get the hang of, is a blast when you do get the hang of it. It's flawed, movement is sluggish, which does affect combat, the game as a whole is rather easy, for most of the game you're fighting the least interesting enemies, and I've said enough about difficulty progression, you get the point. I really like the combat and enemies. and it's the main thing that elevates this game for me. And if it doesn't work for you, the game as a whole isn't going to work for you. But I think it's time to move on. The general gameplay is pretty simple. It's mostly just navigating the levels, which are pretty basic in layout, and getting to the end, sometimes having to defeat an enemy at the end. Level design is pretty basic. There's not a lot that stands out as great level design, but nothing that stands out as bad. It gets the job done. There's some mild platforming, but otherwise you're just going from point A to point B while fighting enemies. The combat is the main focus of the game, so not much of the levels themselves stands out too much aside from what enemies you fight. Though there are some more interesting changes in pace sprinkled around, but I'll get to them when talking about the levels individually. There isn't much exploration value in this game. Most power-ups, health pickups, or weapons are out in the open. You can't really miss them. But there are these exploration markers you can find. There are 5 of them in each level, and they can be a bit harder to find, but then again I never went out of my way to find them, because they don't do anything. Each level has 5 scoring categories, one of which is the exploration markers. There's one for lightsaber accuracy, which isn't very fun because I like just swinging around the lightsaber for fun. And with this game's controls trying to be 100% accurate, sounds like a pain in the ass. Next is for how much you use the Force. The manual also mentions for this one you get a bonus for helping other characters and are penalized for killing them. There are NPCs in some levels, sometimes just civilians or even people fighting with you, and outside of plot important characters, you can just kill them. The only punishment you get besides lowering your score is it depletes your force when you do, which is such a slap on the wrist. Next category is how many attempts you've made. So basically, don't die to get the best score. This game has a sort of lives system, but instead of a consistent lives counter that you can increase, you basically have 5 lives for each level that resets once you start a new level. If you run out of lives, you have to start the whole level over again, which is annoying and doesn't really add anything to the game. But the game is easy enough where as long as you are willing to learn how to play the game, you shouldn't be getting game overs. I already mentioned the exploration category, so the last one is time, which is self-explanatory. But in order to even try for it, you need to complete the other categories first. You can check how you're doing with these in the pause menu, but I've never even tried going for any of these because, as I said, you get nothing for it. Not even an extra cutscene or any acknowledgement, so what even is the point of these? So the game is divided into 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is the 3 Black Heth levels, Chapter 2 is the 3 Jin Ha levels, Chapter 3 is the first visit to Naboo, including the droid ships, which is 5 levels. Chapter 4 is just 1 level on Tatooine and a boss fight, and Chapter 5 is the second visit to Naboo, which is 3 levels. So starting with the Shadows of Coruscant, this is my favorite level in the game, and that sounds like a bad sign. The first level being the best must be downhill from here. It's not that the rest of the levels are bad or even worse than this one. This one is pretty simple and can be beaten very quickly if you just run to the end. It's more that this level is the best to goof around in. It starts off linear, but then you get to this big open area with side areas you can just roam around in. There's not a whole lot here, mainly just groups of Black Heth here and there, and some civilians you can save who will give you health if you save them, usually taking you somewhere else to give it to you. One of which takes you to this lower area. This guy just doesn't need saving, but he gives you health anyways. The level ends when you kill the mini-boss at the end, and move the debris from the front of the train. You could just go straight there and end the level quickly, but the fun of this level is going around all the different places, saving all the people, and hunting down every Black Heth. I've spent so long in this level and learned some interesting things about it. If you turn around at the start, you'll find a Wookiee, and if you talk to him, he'll follow you and help you fight enemies. He's not very good at it, but it's still fun to have a Wookiee partner. But also at the beginning, if you look to the area below, you'll see another Wookiee fighting an enemy with a blaster. You can't just jump down because you'll die of fall damage. And by the time you get there, the Wookiee is usually dead. But rarely, and I mean rarely, like I've only had it happen naturally a couple times in the many years I've been playing this game, he'll actually win the fight. And you can recruit him just like the first Wookiee. But I actually found an easy way to guarantee he'll be there, which was pretty obvious, and I feel a bit dumb for not thinking of it for so long. But when you get far enough to get a checkpoint here, then die, all the enemies and NPCs respawn, including the Wookiee, so you can easily get to him from here without him dying. What's better than 1 Wookiee partner? 2 Wookiee partners. But be careful. For some reason, you can't hurt the first Wookiee with your lightsaber, but you can hurt the second one. And if you do, he'll start attacking you, and he has quite a lot of health. First time I found this guy alive as a kid, I accidentally hit him and was freaked out when he started fighting me. I tried fighting back, but after hitting him a few times and he didn't die, I just ran away and did other things in the level. After a while, I was on this bridge in the middle and had a funny feeling, so I turned around and saw the Wookiee was still following me. Scared the hell out of me. So another interesting thing I found out when goofing around in this level is at the end. So this guy won't attack you until you attack him or move the debris. When you get here, Black Heth will start spawning from below in pairs and come up from either side. When you kill the mini-boss, these enemies will run away and just stand here, and more will spawn just to stand here if you kill them. Other enemies will still attack you. This only happens to these specific enemies that spawn in. Now, most people would assume that this is just an endless wave of enemies. But one day as a kid, I was just bored and didn't fight the boss at all. Instead, I just kept fighting the spawning enemies until they stopped coming. There's a finite amount of enemies that will spawn here for some reason. Did they program a specific numbers of enemies to spawn? It takes a while to kill everyone, so it wasn't intended for you to do this. This level may not look all that interesting to you, and you might argue that it has a lot of wasted space because there's just no point to a lot of the level. But sometimes not everything needs a point. It can be fun just to mess around a seemingly pointless area in a game. The way I played a lot of games as a kid was just to pointlessly goof around in open places, not accomplishing anything, or progressing at all. Maybe it's not the most intelligently designed level. I think it is decent at teaching you how the game plays, but doesn't do that much more. But I had fun just doing whatever as a kid, and for that I'll always have a blast whenever I boot this game up to run around this level. The second level is one where I think some people may have had trouble, and it was one I avoided as a kid, but it's really not bad at all. So you're on top of a tower, and you're making your way to the bottom, fighting the Black Heth along the way. The main thing about this level is you're trying to save a hostage, so you can't let them sound the alarm. It's a lot simpler than it would sound, because the only way they can sound the alarm is with these terminals, and only droids can use them. So destroying the terminal, or killing the droid, will stop them from doing that, and you don't need to be stealthy anymore. Or at all, because all you do is drop down, run right for the terminal or droid. This mechanic also isn't even for the whole level. You go down several floors, but there are only terminals on 3 of them. So for most of this level, you don't even have to worry about it. Aside from that, there's not too much to say about this level. You go down elevators and sometimes can get an enemy to ride with you, which is funny. And there are plenty of explosive barrels to throw at enemies. Not to mention, on the top levels, you can just push guys off the building. The third level is much simpler. It's just 2 landing platforms where you fight enemies, then beat the mini-boss and it's over. You start off fighting some Black Heth, then fight Jin Ha. The Jin Ha do have a cool introduction where in the cutscene you see them off in the distance, and then they see you. But you go on to fight some more of the Black Heth, and after you're done with them, the bridges extend, and a bunch of Jin Ha start coming from each bridge, surrounding you. But that's about it for interesting stuff in this level. It's really short, but the combat is fun, so I can't complain. The first level of Chapter 2 takes us to a swamp fighting the Jin Ha. It's pretty straightforward and linear, but it's fun fighting the Jin Ha, so this is one of my favorite levels. But this level is also the first one where Qui-Gon is with you, which is kind of neat fighting alongside him, but his AI isn't that good. He can't die, you can't even hit him with your lightsabers, so you don't have to worry about him. But he's leading the way, you're just supposed to follow him. And if you veer even slightly off course, he'll be annoying about it.
Where are you going? You are jeopardizing the mission.
Shut up, I'm exploring. If you get far enough away from him, he'll go towards you, so it's not like you have to keep moving. His priority is being close to you, where then he'll start moving through the level, only stopping to fight enemies. But if he's fighting an enemy and you get far enough away, he'll put his lightsaber away to go to you while that enemy is still attacking him. It's a really good thing he's invincible. To end of the level, you jump down here, but when you do, your health briefly turns purple, like when you get an invincibility power-up. Did they do that because you'd take fall damage otherwise? The next level is in the Cortos' mine, and this level is mostly hallways. There's not much here besides hallways and a couple elevator rooms. This one you need to jump down instead of using the elevator. And there's this big room with some red stuff in the pit, and it's fun to push enemies down there. But there's nothing to really say about this level. It's mostly hallways. And the level after it, you're escaping the mine, so it's literally the same level backwards. Like you're going through the level you just beat backwards. Sure, enemies are placed differently, and at the end you fight off a bunch of them with 3 other Jedi, but it's still the same enemies. This is pretty lazy, but going through a level backwards can actually work well. In Halo Combat Evolved, the level Assault on the Control Room had you go through a snowy area with bridges, corridors, and wide open spaces, even letting you drive a tank. You're fighting Covenant the entire time, but after this level the Flood is introduced. And after a couple of levels of fighting Flood, you get to 2 Betrayals. This level is the same as Assault on the Control Room, but backwards. Except it isn't that simple. You do go through the same areas backwards, but now not only are you fighting Covenant, but also the Flood as well as Sentinels, and each of these factions are also fighting each other. This alone varies up the level with more unique combat encounters, but you also get to fly Banshees to reach areas far above you. Sure, you're going through the same environment backwards, but they changed a lot about what you're doing in this level that it has a completely different feel to it. But here, while enemy positions aren't the same, it really is just going through the same level backwards, with nothing to make it feel different. Combat encounters are basically the same with no new enemies, and you don't go to new areas. I guess with this room, the bridges are gone, so you need to turn on these fans to be able to get across, but that's the biggest difference. It's still a fun level just because the combat is fun, but that's it. Chapter 3 is when you start fighting droids. The first couple levels are on droid ships. The first one you're with Qui-Gon, so you're spending the whole time following him while he complains anytime you even slightly get too far from him. He also can't walk straight. He always veers to the sides in these halls for some reason. Speaking of hallways, this level is also mostly hallways, though there is more variety with some big rooms, vents, and this bridge. The end of the level is like the scene from the movie where you defend Qui-Gon as he cuts through the door. And hey, when the droidekas attack them, they don't just zip out there like in the movie. One funny thing about this level is you can find the Viceroy, and there's nothing stopping you from just killing him there. There you go, movie over. Why are we trying to get to the bridge, Qui-Gon? I already took care of the Viceroy. The next level, you're by yourself as you go through a different ship. At least I think it's different. There's not too much that stands out here. You can destroy these tanks, not that there's a point to it. It's just fun. The level ends with a fight with an assassin droid, but as I've said before, these guys are just more Jin Ha, so it's not difficult at all. After that, you finally land on Naboo, skipping the whole meeting Jar Jar and Gungan City stuff. This level is pretty straightforward, but has some more unique elements. It's the first level where you can swim, not that that's very exciting. You can't do much in water. But also it's the first level since the very first with friendly NPCs, not counting Qui-Gon. There are civilian hostages that you can save. You'll need to take out the droids with these blowtorches quickly before they kill them. There are several times where you can save NPCs in this level, though they don't do anything for you unlike the ones in the first level. There's this part where this guy will show you other hostages back at the beginning of the level. I think they expect you to snipe the droids, but I just jump down to fight them. I have to go through the level up to that point again, but it's not too far so I don't mind. Plus more enemies spawn in earlier sections. In the second half of this level, you run into ally NPCs who will fight with you. They aren't that helpful and can get in the way, and the ones with grenades can be annoying, but it's still neat. Though it's funny, you can take their guns away, which causes them to run away, which I love doing, especially when they give me sass.
Hello?
Listen, I respect the Jedi as much as the next guy, but you are seriously starting to get on my nerves. Call for reinforcements!
Another thing this level introduces are these terminals that, once a droid activates, will call for reinforcements. Just like the second level, you could destroy them, though the punishment of a few more enemies isn't very punishing. Also, you can get on this turret and some droids and vehicles will spawn. This is the only time in the game where these guys show up, and you don't need to interact with this at all. So what's the point? This is probably my favorite droid level, mostly because I like the level design. It doesn't do too much special. The next level is an escort mission, but don't worry, it's not difficult at all. You have to protect this woman so she can open doors for you, but every time you enter a new room, she'll stay behind until you defeat the enemies, so she's never really in danger. That's just kinda what this level is, going room to room fighting enemies, nothing much more. This is the first level with droidekas, which is why I usually skipped this level as a kid, but as I said, they aren't that tough. The end of the level has you defending this other guy from 3 assassin droids, which can be rather tough since they actively target him, and he has like 0 self-preservation. Is he teabagging?
Obi-Wan, you failed. Your fear clouded your thoughts.
I don't know why Qui-Gon telling Obi-Wan how he's failed while he's being beaten to death off screen is so funny to me. I actually had to replay this level to show how tough defending this guy can be, because the first time a different friendly NPC followed me in here and took out 2 of these droids, making it much easier. Dude is a tank, what the hell? Where was he when the Queen was kidnapped? And the last level of this chapter is pretty similar to the first one on the planet, so not much really to say about it. I guess there's this tank you need to take out with grenades. This guy will give you grenades when you talk to him, but only a small amount at a time, so you have to harass him to get a full inventory of grenades. Not that you need that many, or would even use them on anything else. At the end, you regroup with Qui-Gon and recreate the scene where they save the Queen, but without Jar Jar. This part can be tough since if the Queen dies, you have to restart. It's not too tough if you're careful, but she can easily be killed if you're not paying enough attention. The main things you want to watch out for besides the assassin droids are the exploding ones. I had a pretty funny fail here where I accidentally killed one of the Queen's assistants, which depleted my force, so I couldn't push the exploding droid that was making a beeline for the Queen. You know, wouldn't killing the Queen be bad for the Trade Federation? I mean, they need her to sign the treaty, yet here they're on orders to kill her if anyone attempts to rescue her. Chapter 4 is only one level, though it is a fairly lengthy level. Unfortunately, there's not much that stands out about this level other than the aesthetics, and you're fighting Tusken Raiders. It's pretty straightforward, without any gimmicks or set pieces. I suppose there are fire pits that have stuff in them you can throw into enemies to set them on fire. There are a few ways to set enemies on fire here, but there's not much to say here. It is a fun level, and a nice change of pace after so many droid levels, but they banked on the enemies being the thing to differentiate this level, which, as I mentioned, they're in between of the Black Heth and the Jin Ha, so it's not that unique. But with Chapter 5, they're back to droids on Naboo, and this first level is at night. Other than that, it mostly isn't too different from the other Naboo levels, except for the second half of this level. You free a bunch of captive pilots and have to escort them back the way you came. This is similar to the last escort mission where they stay behind while you deal with the enemies, but unlike the last one, if you take too long, they will start moving forward even if all the enemies weren't defeated. This can make this one of the harder levels because if just one of these guys dies, you've failed. This used to be another level I avoided as a kid because of this, but it really isn't that bad. By this point in the game, you should have a good grasp on how to play, so it shouldn't be too hard to take out the enemies in time. The next level isn't so unique though. It's more of the standard Naboo level stuff. There really isn't much unique to this level. The only thing is near the end you have this big open area with turrets, and this level is droidicas, but you can ignore them at the end if you just destroy the gun. It is a fun level, but what can I say about it? It's like the least standout level in the game. Now for the final level, and this one is pretty short. You're in a hangar, and endless waves of droids are coming in from a bunch of entrances. This NPC is working on lowering the shields to the power source for the doors. You need to defend this guy, and cut the power to the door he exposes. Pretty short, simple, but fun level. You don't really need to worry about defending this guy, the droids don't come in large enough numbers to pose much of a threat. You also have Qui-Gon helping you, but one funny thing about him is after you disable the last door, you have a few seconds where you're still in control before the cutscene plays. And during those few seconds, you can hit Qui-Gon with your lightsaber. I don't know why you can do this, but I always found it amusing. Who's jeopardizing the mission now? And that's all the main levels. A lot of levels don't have much unique to them, and even the ones that do have more unique stuff don't do a lot with it. The game is carried by the combat, and the level design isn't very interesting. But no level really stands out as bad, so it doesn't hurt the game much. It just could have been a lot better. Also, I wish there were more levels where you fought other enemies, because you fight droids for most of the game, and as I said, they're the least fun enemies. But I still have a lot of fun playing these levels, so even if there is a lot of room for improvement, it doesn't bother me all that much. Now let's talk about bosses. I had mentioned a few mini-bosses, but they really are just normal enemies with more health. The actual bosses are the Jedi fights. Well, the first one is a trading droid, but in between chapters, you have a fight with one of the Jedi Council members. And after defeating them, you unlock bonus optional Jedi fights. These fights are all pretty similar to each other, but get more difficult as the game goes on. The training droid is pathetic, but the actual Jedi can be more of a challenge. They can do most of what you can do, and a little more in some cases, like doing kicks, stabs, or this leg slash. They can also use the Force, but all that means is they will sometimes push you, which can be annoying because it always makes you fall on your back, but if you push them, they'll still be standing. In a practical sense, they are basically stronger Jin Ha since every melee enemy is built the same. They all more or less act the same, just with some small differences. You may have noticed pretty much every enemy or NPC that isn't a battle droid share the same animations, basically. So the way you fight these guys isn't all that different from how you fight Jinha or assassin droids. They can block your attacks, but you can break their defense with enough pressure or by countering their attacks. Though for the Jedi that can do this crouching slash, it's too low to counter, so you need to be careful of that. You have no defense for a force push. If they want to push you, they're going to push you. They can't defend against your pushes, and as mentioned, you fall down while they don't. But you can still push them while on the floor, which can be helpful. There's no point in talking about them individually since the differences between them are very small. Some are more difficult than others, like Eth Koth and especially Mace Windu. Mace is the only Jedi you can't push. It still briefly stuns him, but he won't be moved. If you're not careful, Mace can really mess you up. These fights are some of the most fun parts of the game, and some of the most fun lightsaber duels in any Star Wars game. They are the ultimate test of your lightsaber skills, or at least they should have been. If you know what you're doing, they aren't very difficult, but even if you don't know what you're doing, well, for most of these guys, if you just mash, you can just overpower them. This isn't something you can get away with in normal levels because you'll take a lot of damage in the process. But when all you need to do is defeat one Jedi, it doesn't matter how much damage you take if you can beat them faster than they can drain your health. Now this may not work against some of the tougher ones because of how much health they have and how much damage they do, but at the same time, even with those tougher ones, you could still win like this. I was able to defeat Mace Windu like this. It took a couple attempts, but the fact that it's possible at all is a problem. As much as I like the combat, the AI doesn't do the best job of promoting getting good with it. It is more fun to engage with the combat instead of just swinging wildly, but it should promote engaging with it. Swinging wildly should not work this well. With some refining, this could be an excellent combat system, but as fun as it is still a bit flawed. But anyways, there are two other bosses. First is the Tusken Chieftain. He also is like the Jedi, but without the Force, and instead a flaming axe. This guy is beefy and sets you on fire, so swinging wildly won't work on him, which is good. The arena is also more interesting with you able to push these flaming things at him. Also this object in the center, which me and my sister used to call a flaming onion. There's water at the bottom, which you can use to put out fire, and if you cut the water pipe, the area will start to flood. This is a good fight that is a bit tougher than most of the Jedi. And of course the final boss is Darth Maul. He has a double-edged lightsaber, but once his health is depleted, he gains a new health bar as his lightsaber breaks in half. So he's just like the other Jedi. He also can't be pushed like Mace. Maul isn't much more difficult than Mace. He has more health, but other than that, there isn't much of a difference. I wasn't able to beat him by mashing, but I came close, which is a bit worrisome. I might have been able to if I tried enough times. But when playing how the game intends, he's a pretty fun fight, and the arena is cool too. It of course has the hole in the middle, but there's a ledge in it with some health. But be careful, because if you're unlucky, Maul can push you down that hole. Unfortunately, this fight is only the last part. You don't get to fight on these bridges. It starts with you behind the force field watching Maul kill Qui-Gon. It is cool being behind the shield with full control like this. Just it would have been nice to have the beginning of the fight as well. Although you can do something funny here. If you've already died to Maul, this doesn't work on your first attempt. You can damage Maul by throwing your saber through the force field before the fight begins. Also, I love how when you beat Maul, Obi-Wan straight up pushes him into the pit. He doesn't just fall in. Jeez, he's just in his laying down animation while moving down. It looks so bad. Anyways, after beating the game, there is one more bonus level unlocked. Battle Royale. Here you are up against all the other Jedi you fought, including Qui-Gon. Sounds really hard, but they are also fighting each other. Last one standing wins. This is so much fun and so chaotic. I have spent so much time just replaying this over and over again. Now, one annoying thing is Adi Gallia will always exclusively target you. She'll ignore everyone else and be on your ass the whole time. So this always starts with you trying to get rid of her as fast as possible so you can have fun engaging with everyone else. Now I understand having one exclusively target you because otherwise you could just sit back and wait for everyone else to kill each other, and then swoop in and beat the last one standing easily. But the Jedi that targets you should have been different every time, which would make it more varied and more fun. Imagine going in and Mace is the one targeting you. Plus, Adi is the most aggressive with force pushes, so that's annoying. But that is not enough to ruin the fun. It's always a blast taking this on and trying to kill as many Jedi as you can. Most of the time Mace is the last one standing, though Qui-Gon also ends up being the last one often. It's rare when anyone besides Mace or Qui-Gon is last. But I've had Eth Koth be the one a few times, and even Ki-Adi Mundi and Plo Koon be the last two fighting, which was bizarre. This level can be challenging, and mashing is not going to get you far here, so that's good. Though there still are ways to cheese it, like killing Adi and watching everyone else fight each other. Also, if two of the ones are fighting far enough away from you and one defeats the other, the one remaining will just stand there until you approach, and you can abuse this by throwing your lightsaber at them repeatedly. They'll never get the idea to go after you. But I could easily say this is the most fun part of the whole game. Before I wrap this up, there is a multiplayer mode. It's pretty simple. 2 players pick which Jedi they want, they pick an arena, and they fight. You can't play against bots, which is lame. Sure, you can just fight the Jedi in their boss fights, but it's always the same arena, and it's nice being able to play as the other Jedi. I wish you could unlock the ability to play as these guys in the single player, just for variety's sake. But anyways, this is pretty simple, so not a lot to say. It works well, though there's a bit of an imbalance with the characters, since I think they may retain some of their traits from the single player. I can't tell if some characters do more damage or take more damage, but the obvious thing is Mace still can't be pushed. If you get someone else who knows what they're doing, it can make for an intense match. You never have to deal with enemies who can do everything you can. Force jump, throw objects at you, or even saber throw, which you can't block. Also, being on the receiving end of someone mashing can be a bit overwhelming, but a better player will be able to beat it. It's just a fun, simple mode with not a lot to it. They didn't need to put this in, but I'm glad they did. While it wasn't a game I played a whole lot in multiplayer, I did play a bit with my sister, and we always had a good time. The Flaming Onion Arena was always our favorite because of, well, the Flaming Onion. But there's not much more that can be said here. And that's Star Wars Obi-Wan, a relatively obscure Star Wars game that got a lot of hate, but I think is actually pretty good. It's by no means an amazing game. It's pretty flawed in areas, underdeveloped in others, lacks polish, and is generally rough around the edges. But I don't think it's a bad game. I think that roughness adds some charm to it, and the things it does right I absolutely think outweigh the issues. Sure, it doesn't have amazing level design, but the core combat is just so fun that it doesn't really matter. There certainly is a lot that can be improved, and it would be great if another Star Wars game actually tried to do lightsaber combat like this again, but this is all we got. And I think it's good fun as it is, as long as you're willing to engage with it and learn how to play it. I love this game, and it was essentially my introduction to Xbox. The Xbox was the first non-Nintendo console I ever had, well, excluding the ColecoVision my parents had. And as far as I can remember, this was the first Xbox game I've played. It's not an amazing game, hell, maybe not even a great game, but it's a game that I love, and I will always have a special place in my heart for Star Wars Obi-Wan. I'll see you guys next time.
Pull and hold the force modifier trigger and press the push button to force push enemies. Now push the training droids off the ledge.
Back off! I'm warning you!
Next room for further.
Hey, thanks for watching. With this, I'm done with the smaller games and back to Paper Mario. Though Color Splash isn't the next thing I'm gonna work on. First is some highlights for the Sticker Star playthrough. Hopefully those shouldn't take too long. And then after that is something else Sticker Star related, which shouldn't be too hard to guess what it could be by looking at my channel, but I won't say what it is. After that is Color Splash. Though I may have to pause Paper Mario again so I can get an April Fool's video out, but after that I'm going all in on Paper Mario. I kind of want to be done with Paper Mario, so I probably won't take a break in between Color Splash and Origami King, or at least not as big as this one, but we'll see. And with that, if you enjoy my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Here's a shout out to my patrons, Tanuki, Enemy, Just a Blank, Kaiju, Bowie, Neo, Waluigi #1, and Curb.